Hey YouTube, how's everybody doing today? So in this video tutorial, I'm going to quickly go over how you can process an electronic ARP within Ableton. Now, something to keep in mind before we get started, most of the time you're going to be making these types of changes within the context of a mix. So you're going to be considering where other instruments, vocals, those kinds of things are sitting, and the way that you want this particular sound to interact with other sounds in the song. So that's something to keep in mind. You're generally never really doing processing on a single track by itself without taking your whole mix into consideration. But for this example, I just wanted to show you one way that you could approach something. So let's get into it. For this tutorial, I just dragged in a WAV file, and it sounds like this. So it's just kind of a basic electronic harp. And what I did was I wanted like a little more attitude out of it, and I didn't really like the key that it was in, so I brought it down 19 semitones. So it's a lot darker sounding, and I kind of liked it. And then what I did within the beats algorithm section here is I clicked on preserve transients, and I've dragged this down to about 38. And what that does, hold on one sec, let me pull it down here. And then this has been selected too, so it's affecting the way that the transients of the audio come through. So when it's at 100, the tails within this audio come through all the way, but when it's down like this, it's basically just allowing the initial transient or kind of hit of the sound to come through, and then it cuts off the rest of the audio quicker, so it gives more of like a snappy effect to it instead of this. So I made a conscious decision that I wanted it to be a little bit more snappy, to pull out those tails so that I could kind of reintroduce them in my own way later using delay or reverb. So let's get into the actual processing. What I'll do is I'll show you the whole chain and what it sounds like with it on, and then I'll go through individually each plugin and explain why I did what I did. So without. And with. So again, not a drastic change. I mean, the volume is relatively similar, and that gives you a good idea of what you've actually done to the audio and whether or not it's better and it's not just louder. I did another video on that. You can find it, I don't know, it's on my page somewhere. Anyways, so let's go through the processing here. So I'm gonna turn these off. Actually, I'll just do this. Hold on a minute. It's a little easier. Okay, so first things first, I opened up an EQ8 and I kind of wanted to see where things were sitting on like the overall spectrum. So I'm gonna turn this off. So you can see that there's a lot of stuff below like 100 Hertz that doesn't have any definition at all. And in the context of a mix with a sub bass and a bass in there, that's just gonna be muddying things up. So I put this on here, this high pass, I guess, filter, and I've cut out all of that like low end mud that's not necessary, so that if I had other instruments within the mix, they'd be able to kick bass, all those kinds of things. They'd be able to sit down there without this nonsense kind of muddying things up. And a question I know I've asked myself a lot of times is like, how much of the low end do I cut out? Well, I found when I went above this, there was a lot of content within this region, the 100 Hertz to 300 Hertz, whatever, that actually kind of added to the sound. And once I started going above that, it removed some of the weight, and I didn't want that, so I kept it in. And then with the utility here, all I did was I turned the bass to mono. So anything that I've set below 180 Hertz here is going to be mono, and that helps maintain mono compatibility with any like bass heavy sounds. You usually want those to be within the center of your stereo spectrum. It just helps things sit better and translate across speakers without having too much like stereo phase issues. So then I put a compressor on, and I'm compressing it very heavily because I really wanted to accentuate the transients of this particular piece of audio. So looking at this here, you can already see that like there's not a huge amount of dynamics within this piece, and even listening to it, normally, like the tails and the hits of the sound, there's not a huge volume difference between the two. So I wanted to kind of like bring that back out. So I did so by adding this compressor. And what I've done here is I set a heavy ratio, a quick attack, and a quick release. And this means the compressor is going to turn on quickly when that initial transient hits. It's going to release quickly, and it's going to compress the hell out of that particular section of the audio. So the initial hit of the audio is going to be compressed, and I've turned the output of that piece up by 1.929 dB. Just to kind of level things out so that it's the same volume before and after. And what this does is it's going to accentuate the initial hits more. So again, the difference is pretty subtle, but it's more plucky if you really listen. Oh, another thing I didn't mention, the knee I have at 0 dB. So the knee is like how smooth the compression is. Like if I turn this up, you see how there's kind of like a gradual arc, and the compressor acts a little bit more naturally. It reacts more slowly to the audio. I didn't want that. I wanted it to react as quickly as possible to bring out those plucks. So subtle, but there. Then what I did was I added a little redux in just for some color. Kind of like gives it a little bit of a lo-fi feel. Actually, listening to this again, I might take that out, but anyways. Then I added a Soundtoys effect rack, and in here all I did was put in a little primal tap delay, and this is going to give, like right now the sound is kind of centered in the center of the stereo spectrum. There's a little bit going on in the left and the right headphones, but not tons. So I wanted to add kind of that movement back in that the original audio had, but like I said, with my own earlier, with my own delay and reverb. So subtle, but it's there. I have the mix set fairly low. The low cut I brought up just a little bit here to cut out any of the mud, and then high cut I brought down so that the center of the piece of audio with the snappiness kind of takes precedence over anything that's in the left and right headphones. Because if I bring this up, listen. It's fine, but now there's a lot going on within the high end, within the center, left and right of the stereo image. This kind of allows the listener to center more so in on the middle of the stereo spectrum, while there's still some interesting stuff going on in the outsides, but without it being too distracting. So then I added a little bit of tape just for some more color. And again, it's very subtle. It's just got a little bit of like flutter and wow. So it's got kind of like a warpy feel to it. And I didn't want to drive this too hard because again, I was going for that punch, and tape saturation actually adds like a little bit of compression to things. So if I were to drive this hard, you're going to lose some of the transients that like we wanted to preserve originally. I can do that. It might sound better because it's going to be louder, but if you actually listen to the initial hit of the sound, the click of the sound, that's going to kind of disappear and muddy up. So sure, it's louder, sounds better, but you know, if I were to actually change the output, it's not going to be kind of what I was aiming for. Then I put in an EQ3 because I thought that after putting the tape in, some of the mids got brought out a little bit too much for my liking. And so that's kind of like lowered the volume of everything. So I'm keeping that in mind. I put a short hall reverb on, like very short, just to add a little bit of ambience, because again, if I were to turn this decay up, we're going to have really long tails and they're going to start mixing in with those transients, and I didn't want that. And the mix is set low. It's subtle enough that it adds an environment for the listener, but not too overpowering. And now with all of this, I noticed that like the overall output level was quieter, so I brought the volume back up. it's relatively close to the other like original non-processed piece of audio's volume level, and that gives you again a greater understanding of like what you've actually done to the sound and whether or not it sounds better. So without. Yeah, so I hope you guys learned something. If you have any questions or comments about what you saw today, please feel free to ask me and I will try to get back to you. Have a good one.